put them in through the questions module in your GoToWebinar app. You can just paste them in right there and we'll see them. The recording of this webinar will be available. It will be emailed out to all of you, and it will also be available on our website, which is womensrefugeecommission.org. So, again, feel free to use the questions panel, and we will answer you as we can. And with that said, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. So from over here at the Women's Refugee Commission, we have Dale Busher, who is the Senior Director for Programs. He's going to be starting out. We have Tenza Manel, the Senior Program Officer for Livelihoods in Emergencies. We have Omar Robles, Senior Program Officer for Adolescents in Emergencies. Now we've also got a couple of great panelists joining us from Oxfam. We have Stefan Arnold, who's the Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator, and we have Kate McAllister, who's our Senior Protection Coordinator in South Sudan for Oxfam. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Dale, who will lay the groundwork here.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We're really thrilled to have you all on the phone or have you all joining the webinar. Just a little background. The Women's Refugee Commission is an applied research and advocacy organization. We are working to improve humanitarian practice. We started two pieces of work over the last couple of years, one around adolescent girls in emergency, recognizing the incredible risk and the very specific needs that adolescent girls face in emergencies, and how can we actually identify them and get that right from the beginning. And we also started a comparable piece of work on livelihoods in emergencies and how do we make those safe particularly for women and older girls. And then with Oxfam, our partner who's on the webinar today, my colleagues went to South Sudan to say, let's bring these pieces of work together and look at how we look at economic programming that targets girls and girls' caretakers in the most safe, effective way possible. So that's what you're going to be hearing about today. So thank you, Oxfam, for being such a good partner and piloting these things with us. I would also like, for those of you joining the webinar, to share your own learning with us, to engage with us on future learning. This is the beginning of a process. Let us know if you're interested in also learning more, partnering, having some mentorship, some technical assistance around these kinds of tools as we all collectively look at how do we make the humanitarian system work better for girls from the beginning. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleagues to walk you through these processes. So Omar, you're up next.
Thank you, Dale. And good morning and good afternoon, colleagues. As Dale referenced, it's an important intersection at a crossroads of reaching out and designing more effective livelihoods programs where adolescent girls are beneficiaries. For context, we know that simply implementing an intervention doesn't guarantee that adolescent girls will know about, safely access, or benefit from the livelihoods program that may be being implemented or in its design phase in a particular setting. And however inconvenient or unsettling, the notion that adolescent girls are not engaged in livelihood activities is not a data-driven contention. So in much the same way that girls who live in a Kobo, and this is a setting, this visual that you see on your screen is actually the context in which we'll be, is at Kobo, South Sudan, where we'll be talking about the field implementation results. For us as humanitarians, we also face a fork in the road, as it were. And this fork is about what do we do from the start to make sure that we design an effective livelihoods program for girls. I'd like to share and start with a story, however. This visual is outside of a compound, an NGO compound. To the left along the fence was a space where girls, a safe space where girls in this particular environment had been convening in an existing safe space program. And it was here that I ran into a young girl who left an impression on me. such an impression that she shared via my colleague Martin at Oxfam, that she lived down this path and would travel about 7 kilometers to collect firewood. And she was unaware about the Safe Space program that was actually taking place just on the other side of the fence. So the question then becomes for us, I think, is how do we ensure that girls who have the agency, that might have the ability to access that safe space just because it exists, are participating in a program, but at the same time that girls such as the one that I met, who every day has to travel such a great distance and is exposed to a significant, unique set of risks, is also able to benefit from interventions. So in short, we know that the starting line is not the same. It's not the same for everyone affected by a crisis, be it overlaid by different vulnerabilities. And we talk about women, men, and children, persons with disabilities, the elderly, pregnant and lactating mothers, and I think we're all well aware as a humanitarian community of these vulnerable subpopulations and subgroups. And we use terms regularly in our proposals and in our communication materials about how we reach out to these different population groups. What does it mean for adolescent girls who often are being overlooked in the status quo approach to programming? We know that girls fit into many categories. There's a diversity and an intersecting, there's a diversity of who girls are, their capacities, and also their risks. And oftentimes, we view them as children, despite the fact that they're assuming adult roles and responsibilities, particularly when they're displaced. It's before, during, and after, certainly. They also have that intersectingness of vulnerabilities. Adolescent girls can be pregnant. We will see those results as young as 12 in South Sudan. Lactating, they could be caring for infants, they themselves could be disabled. And then because they're young and female, right, overlaid by displacement, the fragmentation of their social networks and their abilities to reach out to other individuals, they face a unique set of protection risks. So what I'd like to do is present you, as I close, with a summary slide of the different facets of what it is that make up who an adolescent girl might be, right? Particularly around the diversity and intersecting vulnerabilities in her lives. And then share with you that one of the tools that we'll talk about today, and the work that we collectively have done with merging the I'm Here and the Clara, is about being able to identify some top-line vulnerability and capacities from the earliest days of a program design, and in this case, a livelihoods intervention that is integrated across the board with different, an integrated livelihoods intervention, right? A comprehensive livelihoods intervention that focuses on girls. So part of this was about piloting an approach that here at the Women's Refugee Commission has been put forward, as Dale referenced, to identify girls in the earliest days. And the I'm Here approach is a series of steps and complementary field tools that can immediately inform how relief operations respond to girls' needs, vulnerabilities, and capacities, as well as concurrently shape the design of humanitarian programming that is tailored specifically for the girls in the community. And what we've done, working with a series of actors, several partners, has been to outline these steps on the left-hand side that are on the screen, from identifying the crisis-affected community, generating a context-specific snapshot of who girls are within a specific displaced community, holding focus groups with girls, and then making sure that the plans that we build are responsive to those girls' needs and to their inputs, and then rallying that support. None of us work in isolation. Girls are not a sector. However, the responses and the needs that they have require a collective action within a crisis setting. And we have to be mindful that we need to engage the capacity of adolescent girls across the board. Now, we can say what needs to be done, but one of the things that the Women's Refugee Commission, and something that Tenzin and I have really been trying to do in collaboration with a series of stakeholders and actors, has been to generate the field tools that help us carry out those steps. And what we'll be speaking about today is touching upon these tools that help facilitate implementation and how they can actually be done in a way that aligns with people's existing workloads. How does it complement things that are already in motion, and how it can be used to facilitate the type of response that we want. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Tenzin.
Thank you, Omar. So in the livelihoods community, we are very good at livelihoods assessments and analysis, but we often fail to integrate these analysis with gender and protection analysis. And in particular with adolescents, and furthermore with adolescent girls. What we want to see is integrated livelihoods, gender, and protection analysis. And gender risk analysis is this in practice to identify the risks faced by targeted communities with respect to gender relations and identities, to render visible the risks faced by different cohorts, and within adolescent girls, subpopulations, adolescent girls who are married, with children in school, out of school, and identify their specific needs and the actions that we need to take. The benefits and liabilities of an intervention are context and gender specific, and we know that new economic opportunities for adolescent girls, as well as women, often results in new risks. Engaging adolescent girls, as well as women, in economic activities can create pathways for empowerment, but can also expose girls and women to new risks, including gender-based violence. And these risks can be mitigated through program planning, through ongoing gender risk analysis, and it's our responsibility as humanitarian actors to do so. At the Women's Refugee Commission, we've been undertaking action research project, and we've identified two critical gaps. The first, that practitioners often fail to ensure integrated analysis, and second, that practitioners lack easy-to-use field-level tools to bridge this gap. So now I'm going to talk to you about specific tools that we've integrated with the I'm Here approach, which is called the CLARA, Cohort Livelihoods and Risk Analysis. The CLARA approach assesses livelihoods risks and community-based protection strategies utilizing focus group discussions and interviews, mitigates risk through protective program design, including identifying opportunities to strengthen community-based protection strategies already in play, to leverage monitoring and community mobilization, things which all organizations do, which can be amplified so that programs can be more protective, and to adapt design and operations for safety and inclusion of all. So the CLARA can inform program design. It can be used to monitor implementation and outcomes, to avoid negative unintended consequences from our actions, as well as highlight needed program correction. The CLARA guidance is 4 steps to capture risks associated with livelihoods, including gender-based violence, as well as potential risks arising from programs in response to crisis. The 4 steps are secondary data review, primary data collection, data analysis, and program design, and lastly, implementation and monitoring. These steps promote gender-sensitive, safer livelihoods interventions. And the CLARA tools have been developed to execute step 2, primary data collection. The tools are modular, so they're flexible for practitioners in the field who can adjust. They can select from questions to fill gaps in gender protection and livelihoods analysis. They can be adapted both in phrasing and probes to context, for camp setting, for urban setting, for rural setting. And the tools include focus group discussion guides, as well as participative ranking methodology version, interview discussion guides, as well as a logic tool for training facilitators. And all of these tools are available both in adolescent and adult versions, and are currently available in English, but will soon be available in both French and Arabic. Together, these tools equip programmers with the information they need to design safer, gender-sensitive livelihoods that take into consideration the different needs, risks, and protection strategies of adolescent girls and boys and their caregivers. And this information also assists practitioners to monitor risks and mitigation strategies so that programs can be adapted as needed to ensure that adolescent girls and their family members can all participate safely and programs can be as inclusive as they must be. These tools are qualitative, as you've noticed, and they can be paired with quantitative tools. In today's webinar, we're talking to you about the integration with the I'm Here approach, but they can also be integrated with other livelihood tools, for example, the Emma or the 48-hour tool. And these tools are applicable across emergency settings and all phases of the emergency, and as I mentioned before, are intended to be adapted to each context. With that, I'm going to pass to my colleague Stefan at Oxfam, who will share with us about Oxfam's operations in South Sudan.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'll just introduce a little bit our program here in South Sudan. I'll keep that very short. And then I'll say something about the implementation of Clara research here with us in Akobo. So setting the stage to begin with, you should see a map of South Sudan. Our humanitarian interventions are concentrated in the greater Upper Nile region, mostly around Jonglei, where we have several bases that are interconnected through market linkages. And that is what we are trying to push further. As an organization here in South Sudan, we are concentrating on food security and livelihoods programming, on WASH programming, and we have a strong component in protection and gender as well. But as Tenzin kind of pointed out earlier, connecting these different departments is not always that easy. And with that, I'm already in the Clara research that was conducted here. So there were two things. I mean, the one thing is to connect the different departments, and the other thing is working with female youth. We were really struggling to find out information about female youth because they are not really represented and they don't really have agency as other groups do. So, for example, there are women's groups across the country, but usually young women, adolescent girls are excluded from that. You have male youth groups that push their interest, and at least their interest is being seen in the public sphere, but that is not the case for girls in particular. So it's really difficult to see this group of people as a group that you can work with because they are not very visible in general. So that is what made it really interesting when WRC first approached us with the suggestion to undertake Clara here in South Sudan for us to partner with them. In the beginning, to be quite frank, I was a bit worried that this would just be another research exercise. The outcomes seemed very alluring, and we were very interested in that. But of course, all of us have been doing many monitoring visits, many data collection visits. It's a lot of work, and at the beginning, of course, I was a little bit worried that this would sink a lot of resources and would lead to limited results. But in the end, and this is a good point to thank you, Tenzin and Omar, when they arrived here, they came with the tools prepared, and they went to Akobo together with our program quality manager and conducted the research there. with locally hired researchers, and the data collection section was done in 10 days and has led to very interesting results that Kate will talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. With that, I hope you're still hearing me, because I don't hear any of you. I'm leading over to Omar, who will be presenting a couple of the key results.
Stefan, thank you very much. I can hear you, and I really appreciate that background and context. Colleagues, what we'd like to do now is turn the attention to some outputs and key findings and make the link to some top-line recommendations. Starting with the first step that we went through was working with a team of enumerators comprised of men and women, as well as Oxfam staff in Akobo, was to get a better idea of where programming was taking place, to identify a particular set of service areas, as we call it. If we were to ask a humanitarian actor, for example, in Akobo, where do they work, we like to draw to a level of specificity that has the girls' mobility in mind. So we work in Jonglei State, where in Akobo, okay, where in Akobo are your interventions, where are your programs, and how are they taking place in relation to some key services and structures. So we use a GPS, a tracking, a mobile-based, smartphone-based application to help identify the service area as well as key resources within it. And in this case, we generated this top-line, just visual output. What I'd like to share with you and identify is just the concentration of resources near the river, which, based on girls' insights, as well as boys, I would say, it is an environment that is sort of like a danger zone, place not to go. I'd also like to highlight here that Area 2 is where we found a concentration of displaced and highly vulnerable girls, or girls that were in what we call categories of heightened vulnerability, which I'll share in the following slides. Notice that Area 2 is also some distance away from both the resources as well as these two girl groups that we've identified on their safe spaces, existing safe space programs that were taking place off to the right, north of the river, top right-hand side of your screen. Those are where the girls' safe spaces are actually located, and they're located near the NGO compounds, largely, predominantly, and part of that was driven by a security, a decision-making around security at the time. So one of the recommendations that came out of just this was to contextualize the relationship between where the vulnerable groups are, where current programming is, and how is it that we can situate those safe spaces, help identify, inclusive of girls' inputs, where those safe spaces could be within Area 2, so that you can start building that social capital amongst girls as you start introducing interventions. So I'd like to highlight here the girl roster and share with you some results. We've been talking about making girls visible. I've referenced different profiles of vulnerabilities and capacities, but what does that actually mean? So what, and what can I do with it? Here on the screen is the girl roster, which is a tool developed by the Population Council, and it basically infuses the learning that who you reach matters. It's what we do, it's the introduction of assets, but it's also around making sure that we are accountable to the poorest girls in the poorest communities, as Population Council would say, and the most at-risk, hardest to reach girls who might be otherwise overlooked. Okay. Put another way, we tend to, if we just build it and assume that they will come, reach girls who are in school. That's the green zone. We might use the words vulnerable, marginalized in our proposal. We might go as far as to, in our communications materials, highlight that our intervention has reached those girls that are out of school and as well as married girls. But there's this concept of elite capture. If we don't take proactive steps, such as using the girl roster, the boy matrix and an Inclusion Now module and identifying even disabilities that exist among girls, that we stay on the left-hand side of the screen. So this is what we were able, these are actual results. And I overlaid here your attention because I want to draw your attention to this particular area, as I was referencing before. On the left-hand side of your screen, these are host community adolescent girls. These are actual girls that were identified using the Girl Roster tool. It is a smartphone-based tool that requires teams of 2, a male and a female, presumably, to go, as is standard practice, to go through the community, in this case door by door, and ask a series of non-sensitive questions. It takes about 7 minutes to complete the Girl Roster, the Boy Matrix, and the Inclusion Now. And in a systematic fashion, what you saw earlier in the map, those dots, are all the areas that were reached, all the different households. We don't interview children, and if no one's home, it's marked and recorded so that we can identify the number of households attempted to reach, as well as whether consent was secured. If it wasn't secured, why not? But to this result, you can see that girls in this case that are from host families are largely in school. If I overlay that with displacement and I go back and forth, you can see the decrease in number. Right? So displaced girls are not, according to heads of households that responded, attending school as compared to their host community peers. Conversely, you can look at the same slide, and if I draw your attention to category of heightened vulnerability, being out of school, overlaid with the accompaniment status, there's a significant difference there. Okay? So programmatically, the implications, when we combine the results from the service area mapping, where we know where we've done this work, we overlay these findings with where displaced adolescent girls are living, sort of their reality in this top-level vulnerability category, merits a particular unique set of response, including the type of focus group discussions that get done, right? And the inputs and the insights. We can attempt to be more targeted in the girls whose opinions and insights about the type of programs and their needs and their risks might be. In closing here, I'd also like to highlight that there's a development of colleagues here at the Women's Refugee Commission with our partners that talk about making sure that curricula are tailored to the development stage of girls. And in both contexts, we can see that the population was, young adolescent girls in this context and setting. And then there's another element to this. In comparing results from the Girl Roster to the Boy Matrix, we can look at the gender-based differences. We can also look at differences in how girls from host communities versus displaced families are compared across high levels of vulnerability. And I just wanted to share 2 different slides that make that point. The first here is a collapsed version of the Girl Roster presented differently. So host girls, as I shared earlier, this is just 10 to 18-year-olds. So this is not including the 19 to 24-year-olds you saw on the previous slide, or the 6 to 9-year-olds. Just adolescent girls, 10 to 19. And you can see the difference on those macro categories across all ages. And if I show you boys, you can see that in this setting, in this particular context, when boys are displaced within these families, they are in school. And I think that that speaks to just making sure that we're aware about the gender dynamics. Based on findings in other settings, this hasn't always held as starkly as it did in this situation and context. Nevertheless, it does speak to the setting in which Oxfam and other partners are operating. So I'd like to turn it over to Tenzin now.
Thank you, Omar. So following on implementation of the I'm Here tools, we did the core focus group discussions utilizing the participative ranking methodology. And we asked questions about girls' engagement in livelihoods, their risks, as well as their protection strategies. And however unsettling it may be, Girls are engaged directly and indirectly in livelihoods activities in Akobo. They support their families, they're exposed to risks, and they self-report taking steps to promote their safety. Their participation generates income for households. They help to meet basic needs, to reduce household expenditure, and also to generate time saving for other members of their families. Girls perform activities such as care work. They contribute to subsistence farming, as you can see on this slide, to fishing. They collect goods for sale or for household use, for example, construction materials, sand, rocks, thatch, poles. They collect firewood for use at home as well as sale on the market, and they also collect water for consumption as well as food preparation for sale. Girls encounter risks associated with these activities, including gender-based violence, insecurity, as well as workload injuries. And they rely on social protection strategies, including being accompanied by their brothers, their fathers, or other girls as they go to the forest, as they go to the farm, and they also choose to limit their movement, both limiting the distance that they travel as well as the time of day that they do. So at the time of our assessment, risk mitigation has yet to be fully integrated into program design, and currently in Akobo, the gender-based violence response is fractured. Comprehensive measures to mitigate the risks that girls articulate, as well as those of their caregivers, are not yet included within program design or monitoring frameworks. And the livelihoods interventions which are ongoing and intended, including producer groups and protection committees, need to integrate adolescent girls and ensure their safety as they're clearly engaged in livelihoods. Actors in Akobo shared with us that due to donor funding gaps, the GBV referral and response mechanisms are currently halted. And this is leaving adolescent girls as well as women without the support that they need. And we need to be responsible to realities on the ground. We need to integrate adolescent girls and be cognizant of their indirect and direct participation and make sure that they're benefiting from livelihoods interventions because they'll most certainly continue to take part. I'll now pass to my colleague Kate at Oxfam. Kate, are you there?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, I hope so. So I just wanted to talk a bit about what we were able to do at Oxfam with the findings from this study. So in terms of direct utilization, in Akobo, we were able to take this information and work with our protection committees. The protection committees had raised it as an issue for adolescent girls of forced marriage. And so we were able to take this information to kind of work with them to confirm, to work with them to support their findings. So they were saying that this is a major issue to them, and we were able to take the findings from the work that Tenzin and Omar did in Akobo to show them that, like, okay, these are the numbers that we're finding in terms of adolescent girls, the different demographic information. Where can we look at to try to engage with the different sets of girls to try to make significant change in the cultural practice of forced marriage? I mean, do we need to engage with the girls that are in school, out of school, with the community leaders to target girls to try to reduce this type of forced marriage? So the protection committees really found that information to be really, really useful for us, and it was really useful for us to be able to base the conversation on this to then make action points to move forward in terms of, okay, so this is our plan in terms of engaging the community. In addition to that, as Tenzin had mentioned, there was some findings around lack of referral pathway, and there was also information around kind of the general roles of girls in terms of livelihoods activities. They have a very, very heavy burden. And so we're getting ready to start a project with a local partner, Nile Hope, and with this information, with these findings, we're able to kind of try to develop this small project targeting to have this partner work with us and our livelihoods activities, as well as to work with other actors in Akobo to try to influence the way the programming is done to have a better protection lens for adolescent girls who are responsible for a lot of the informal livelihoods activities. And so I think that's a really concrete way of how we were able to use this information. I would say, though, just as a practitioner who's very, very keen on adolescent girl engagement, I think the bigger help was that right around the time that this was going on, we were also engaging in a very large proposal for our country program. And I think oftentimes one of the things you run into with this type of programming is people not understanding why it's that important. Like, yes, we need to target everybody in that, but why adolescent girls? And so this is a really good, having these findings was really, really important in terms of being able to advocate internally for why this is really important for us to focus on, and we were able to get aspects of this into that big proposal, as well as a less, if there are tools that are available and easy, and we could point to Akobo and say, look, we were able to put this into place, it didn't require that much input or resources, and we were able to come up with this really important information. It really made it an easier sell to the decision makers in terms of getting these types of assessments and analyses into the induction phase and of the proposal, or the project, so that we could know that moving forward, we could make sure that adolescent girls will be targeted with the final project activities. So those are the main ways I think that this really has benefited us and directly, and more in terms of advocacy and leverage. And I'm going to hand it over to Tenzin.
Thank you, Kate. So as this is the first time that the Women's Refugee Commission has integrated the I'm Here approach and the CLARA tools, we identified many opportunities to improve efficiency and to be able to roll out integration with less resources, which we'd like to share with you. So going forward, both for Oxfam and other actors in South Sudan to scale this integration, as well as WRC looking for other opportunities to pilot this integration in other contexts, we see the following being an efficient approach. So we would revise the implementation timeline to 10 days, also reduce the number of staff to 10, and over these 10 days, we would kick off with 3 days of training, and this is working with enumerators, so this timeline can be adjusted if you're working with technical staff. But 3 days of training, 101 of CLARA and I'm Here, 1 day for the service mapping, 3 days for the girl roster, the boy matrix, and the inclusion module, 2 days to run the CLARA focused group discussions utilizing the PRM methodology. And this would be with different subpopulations and lively groups. So certainly with girls, as well as boys, their caregivers, men and women, and also an opportunity to conduct focus group discussions with farmers, with fishermen, etc. And followed by 1 day of key informant interviews, also utilizing the CLARA tools. And we see these interviews as an opportunity to reach the hardest to reach, or those who might not be represented within the focus group discussions, for example, girls who are married, or persons with disabilities who are homebound, for example, or the elderly. So now we're going to move on to questions, and many of you have already submitted questions. Kim is going to help curate them, and Omar and I and Kate and Stefan are happy to take all questions that you have. So the first question is, has the Clara tool been used with cache programming yet? If so, any insights? We also piloted the Clara with Oxfam in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. We had a webinar yesterday where our colleagues from Oxfam discussed how the Clara has informed more inclusive cache for work programming. In that context, following on the Clara assessment, Oxfam was able to take the results as well as the methodology and continue to consult communities on how women could safely participate. In Iraq, women are often within their homes, and so Oxfam was trying to problem solve how women could participate rather than nominating a male family member, for example, and they were able to identify with women that painting indoors or doing light home repair indoors or preparing food for men doing cache for work or providing childcare for women engaged in painting were all viable and safe options for women so that they could participate in the cache for work activities. So far, this has been the only time that the tool has been used within cache programming, but WRC is certainly looking for opportunities to do so with partners, and for any cache-based intervention, it should be applicable in that whether it's to support small business development or what have you, there needs to be that lens to make sure that the assistance is safe and inclusive.
Thanks, Tenzin. We have a question that was posed about how have we applied these tools in an urban refugee context. And I'd like to speak specifically with respect to the I'm Here approach and those tools. They have been applied in several more urban contexts. These include Greater Cairo, as well as Turkey, along the border, the southeast border community. We've also been working really closely with, and both of those interventions, I do want to acknowledge those partners. In Egypt, it was with Save the Children. In Turkey, it was with Mercy Corps. And then the third urban refugee context that comes to mind is a current partnership we have with the Danish Refugee Council and the work that they've been doing in several communities across two different areas, Tripoli being the most urban of the two. And with respect to the Clara and its application in an urban refugee context, I'm going to turn it over to Tenzin.
Thanks, Omar. So as of now, we've piloted the Clara in South Sudan with Oxfam, as we've discussed today, in Iraq with Oxfam, in KRI, as I mentioned earlier, as well as in Nigeria with Mercy Corps. None of these settings have been urban, all have been rural or kind of peri-urban. So we're looking for opportunities to do so, but as the tools are adaptable, they're certainly applicable in urban contexts, changing the phrasing or probing of the questions to ask, for example, about day labor or domestic work versus farming or fishing is quite straightforward and can be done with program teams to make sure that it's as appropriate for the context as possible.
So we have a question in the study in South Sudan and the application of the tools. The interviews were conducted door to door, but children did not answer the questions. In general, who answered on behalf of the family, and how did data collectors explain the study and encourage people to open up and answer these questions? So to the first part of that, Persons who answered the questions are those that identify as being head of household, to use that term, and in short, persons who can speak on behalf of those that live within the family. Part of the training is a script. It's actually an applied training, and it's something that we rehearse. We rehearse different scenarios. For example, if a child were to answer the door, how to respond. If no one's home, our standard practice is to leave something that's a positive input, some type of information. In some contexts, it's been about a flyer that identifies some key resources that may be available in the community, so that every engagement is an opportunity to connect people in the community to potentially an existing service, to announce a forthcoming program, and something that we design and develop with the partner. So we've in terms of, oh, the next question. Okay, so an additional, right now we're going to turn it over to colleagues, to Kate, for a question that has been posed to Oxfam.
So the question is, how did information from the Girl WRC actually inform decisions for program design, specifically who to engage with in the community, etc.? They're looking more for not about identifying the most vulnerable and difficult to reach girls, but about choosing which community members to engage with. And the answer to that is a bit twofold. So what we did is we brought the information to our existing committees in the community. Looking at that information, and one of the things that the girl roster would have provided to us is looking at those girls who are living with parents. How many of them are living with parents? How many of them are living with single parents? Because we oftentimes see single family or single parent families more willing and younger, or more willing to engage their girls in forced marriage and at a younger age due to the bride price that they can bring in with that marriage. And so looking at that information, one of using that finding, and one of the groups that we were looking to engage with was parents. But in addition to that, also taking that information and providing it to the communities, who then, with their knowledge of the community, were also able to say, okay, one of the major sources of traditional justice and the okaying of marriages is the traditional leadership or chiefs. And so they also provided an invaluable complementary knowledge set to those data. So they took that data and then used that to then use their knowledge of the community to come up with additional targeting insight. And that's
Okay, thanks for that, Kate. So moving on, additional questions, please keep them coming. The follow-on question is, does WRC partner with UNHCR in implementing these approaches? What are the bureaucratic logistical challenges from integrating across organizational lines? Yes, I'm smiling. To the first part, we as an organization do work closely with UNHCR. On this particular work with respect to I'm Here implementation in Egypt, UNHCR was supportive of the work. In Egypt, instead of going door to door, we overlaid the approach remotely. That is, we worked with the team to carry out the service area mapping using Google Maps, identifying areas where concentrations of Syrian refugees actually lived within this greater Cairo community. And then with respect to UNHCR support, they had been doing some their own assessment and collected a significant amount of data. So removing unique identifiers, what we were able to do is actually overlay the questions with contact information. So we did have contact information, and then produce an output table. And UNHCR was helpful in that process. And our partner there was Save the Children, who had also been working on this particular project, an assessment initiative called the Data Man Project at the time. Moving forward, part of this might speak to a next steps that persons may have been referencing, I believe, in the questions. What we're looking forward to doing across both these resources is identifying those opportunities where either the tools, the information that it's collected, the process learning, can be integrated into existing tools, such as what I just described in Egypt. And a part of that would be working more closely with UNHCR. I think what we've done in this initial phase is really begin sort of generating that collective action with the runners, you know, persons who are implementing programming that are, whether it's a livelihoods intervention has been the entry point, or an entry point where organizations in a particular area are committed to working with adolescent girls, and then doing this type of action learning. We know that we need to expand that to a series of stakeholders across agencies as well as different sectors to identify what are the actions and the decisions that they make based on these outputs and how they interpret them. So that'll be a next phase of our work.
Thank you, Emma. So another question we've received is what programming components can be added to livelihood programming to ensure women's safety, and in particular to tackle gender norms at the family and community level. There are many components which can be added. I would refer you to WRC's checklist for mitigating gender-based violence in livelihoods programming. But in terms of the Clara pilots that we've done so far, for example, in Iraq with Oxfam, when you were asking communities using the Clara tools, what are women's livelihood activities, everyone, men, women, girls, and boys initially said nothing, women do nothing. But then we probed and probed, asking also what are opportunities for women, initially met with nothing, women can't do anything. But then the community reflecting upon all the things that women do, preparing cheese, kitchen gardens, trading from their homes, there were clearly opportunities how women could engage in market-based livelihoods interventions. And these kinds of conversations are an opportunity for male engagement, both at the family level and the community level, to make sure that livelihoods interventions are inclusive of women, even in quite conservative contexts, and further to explore their risks and needed protection strategies. Another example is in Nigeria. Women asked, they didn't want to be homebound, they wanted to work together so that they were less isolated in their homes and wanted to work in cooperatives. Another example is working with traders, women who are selling goods for women customers only, feel safer because men aren't coming to their door. So there's plenty of opportunities both to work in terms of community engagement, as well as working with individuals to adapt their business plans so they're safer, and then larger programming elements.
Thanks, Tenzin. I recognize, and I've been called out for not answering the second part of the last question, and it was about how do you navigate, I guess, different bureaucratic lines. And I want to say that you do it by focusing on effectiveness and accountability. One of the learnings that has come from doing this work is the importance of certainly framing this work around effectiveness. I think people, oftentimes we've avoided terms, it's not research, for example. These are program design tools. It's not to supplant existing per se assessments, nor secondary research. It should all, this feeds into, once you identify using other information sources, a place in a crisis-affected area where you're going to design a program, how do we get to the level of practical, actionable information that is as context-specific as possible, in using, the least number of of resources, it's doable, etc., which is something that humanitarian practitioners ask for. Part of that, though, is getting buy-in. In Turkey, for example, we knew that we needed sign-off from a government. And we worked with Mercy Corps to draft a one-pager, and in that one-pager, we were very conscious about saying that this is a population that merited attention, and we used their own value-based system, the commitments that the government had already outlined in its documents and its support to Mercy Corps, to demonstrate how this was actually going to feed in to accomplish those goals that they cared about for a population that otherwise we might not be able to reach. We've done the same thing in Iraq, etc. So there are strategies that we've tried to use. Let me see. Sure, go ahead.
Thanks, Omar. So the next question is there a plan to centralize all of the CLARA data collected from these different pilots into one analysis? Can the findings be generalized? The results of the CLARA are quite context-specific. As I mentioned earlier, the tools get at the different attitudes, behavioral factors, etc., which drive risks, in particular risk of gender-based violence within a particular context. So I would say no, they should not be generalized, and the advantage of not doing so is to truly have a picture of where you're working. And as Omar started saying, okay, you're in Jonglei State, okay, you're in Akobo, okay, well, where? In Area 2, we really need to look at, for adolescent girls, as well as men, women, boys, and girls, what are their activities, what are their risks, how can we make livelihood safer for them, and those realities might differ, and most likely do, from another area within Jonglei State, for example. The data collected from the different pilots, Omar and I shortly will be publishing a case study from this integrated pilot on WRC's website. There is a report from the pilot with Oxfam in Iraq, also on our website, and Mercy Corps is preparing an external brief based on the pilot gathered there. So all of those will soon be available. Are there any other questions?
Maybe I'll ask. Colleagues, while we're filtering through some additional questions, I just wanted to share as a practitioner going into this and working with Tenzin and with Martin Lubang, who was our colleague in Akobo at the time, that what integration actually looked like between these two tools was sort of, was the question, not only from a process learning, but also the type of findings. And in the past, with just doing the I'm Here approach, we've done focus group discussions using a participatory ranking methodology that you can find online. Columbia University scholars pieced together a publicly available document, and I encourage people to take a look at it because it's an accessible methodology that people are able to facilitate. We've actually had adolescent girls themselves facilitate focus group discussions with younger adolescent girls using the methodology. But with respect to the CLARA, it was really fascinating and fantastic and illuminating to have girls segmented into whether or not they were out of school or in school come together and actually rank, talk about, and discuss the livelihoods that they were engaged in, understanding that concept of how they either helped support and generate income or saved time, by taking on a task that otherwise a family might have to pay someone else to do. And in addition to that, when asked what are the risks that they face, girls themselves processing the risks associated with those different livelihoods, and then having a discussion of how they ranked those those risks. And then going a step further, the third part of those focus group discussions was really around their risk mitigation strategies. And what was interesting is there was a question earlier about, well, how do you take this information and inform programming? We've talked about advocacy. I feel like internal advocacy, submission into proposals. But I want to take this moment to emphasize to colleagues on the call that this is a starting point for intervention design. It's a starting point for a particular set of assets that we know have a protective effect. We know that girls themselves, absent the CLARA, when we've done focus groups with girls, they reference livelihoods, they reference income, they reference the fact that they have livelihood-based needs. And what I was able to see from the integration of the tool was to go a step further to parse that out. So in addition to just that top line information, was really then saying, well, how do we pull out that risk mitigation strategy? How do we facilitate that, take that and elevate it to the next level? And I think that that's something that can even happen after a proposal's been awarded, because it elevates our ability to take that input, make it meaningful, not just tokenistic, and in this case for a livelihoods intervention, shape some decisions that can be documented and tracked. So thanks for that. There's a question, what about the pilot in Egypt? Will that be available? So the pilot, the results from Egypt, do we have a particular email for the persons that asked these questions? Okay, if the person who asked that particular question, if you could send an email to info@wrccommission.org, I can respond directly to that. We don't have a publicly available right now online document. We do have some slides. We have given presentations with that data, and it's something that I'd certainly want to facilitate with Save the Children, who's our partner, and make sure that they're acknowledged in that process and that communication. But I'm happy to do that, and happy to schedule a Skype call if you'd like to talk about it.
Great. So we'd like to share with you where you can find updated resources, which is on WRC's website. So there's the updated CLARA guidance and tools, as well as the updated I'm Here steps and tools to reach adolescent girls in crisis, which chronicles Omar's many pilots in 6 countries and in more than 25 communities. We're always looking for new partnerships and new projects, so please reach out to us. You can send any questions you might have about today's webinar or any of our other work to info@wrcommission.org. And thank you so much for tuning in, and much gratitude to both Stefan and Kate for joining us from South Sudan.